And as you heard, we're using a bio-derived, totally environmentally friendly fuel. And unlike, biodiesel, which you've probably heard of, ours is also non-toxic. So not only is it important for us that it's close to, carbon neutral and can be grown sustainably, but it's also important to us that when these rockets come down, if for some reason we can't recover them, and our intention is to reuse them totally, but we expect maybe we'll lose some of them, we don't want it contaminating the ecosystem below in our oceans. And that is ultimately where we're launching from very soon here in the next year. We plan to be launching off the coast of Maine. Now, the big thing, as you'll also hear quickly from Emily, is Maine has an incredible opportunity, and it's not all of Maine. It's actually quite literally Washington County, Maine has an incredible opportunity. From basically about Bar Harbor, which isn't Washington County, but from about Bar Harbor to about Cutler is the only part of the Maine coast where you can easily launch satellites into what's called a polar orbit. In a study that Emily was involved with a couple of years ago, we determined that about half of the tiny satellites that want to get up to space want to go into this polar orbit. And right now, the only place you can get into polar orbit is really two on-ramps in the whole entire country. One is a very expensive military base out in California. The other one is Alaska, which in many ways is very similar to our economy, sort of based upon tourism and agriculture and aquaculture and fishing. So, Maine has an incredible opportunity that you can't see anywhere else. And we plan to take advantage of that and be the first ones to take advantage of that. Get this to go next. So just, we have this doesn't do justice to the number of people who are involved in Blue Shift today. We're planning to grow to 50 people large, and there's a number of folks that are not even shown today. Our plans are to go after two different markets. We're doing this in sort of a staged approach, and the very next launches will occur off of our future launch site off the coast of Washington County. Initially, we're going to go after the suborbital launches, which is taking things up to space and bringing back down. They'll be brought down in the ocean. We'll probably use something, maybe a lobster boat that somebody we pay to help us recover the rockets from the engine, bring them back to land and refurbish them for launch again. Orbitally, we plan to launch orbitally these nanosatellites up into space as early as 2024, 2025, depending on the funding. So this is just sort of a visualization of what it means to be polar orbit. But as you can see, the reason why we can put things into polar orbit, which is really just going around north to south pole, is because we can launch right over the ocean and there's no house, no property in the way. And you really can't do this from anywhere else without going over coastal properties. It's a really unique opportunity. And because we can do it without going over people or property, it really lowers the cost and access to space today. Now, our operations and what we're looking to do, what we're doing is, here I'm standing right now in the former Naval Air Station at a hangar here at Brunswick, and we will be doing our manufacturing R&D largely here. But our plans are to do launches up off of Washington County, and we are looking very closely at adding not only site logistics jobs, where our customer service, sales, integrating our customer payloads on site up in Washington County. We were also looking at jobs that will be for manufacturing. We anticipate bringing the rockets back onto the ocean. We anticipate it's going to be logistically far easier and less expensive to remanufacture and refurbish those engines right there at the site, close to launch site, as opposed to bring them all the way even down to Brunswick for refurbishing. So our plans are at this time to add up to 50 jobs in the state of Maine. And those are direct jobs, let alone, the number of jobs that we expect to be knock-on jobs as a result of the additional tourism and hopefully associated companies that will be joining us into this new era of launching literally Maine into space. I'll add on just one quick note. When we launched from this, when we launched off of the coast of Maine, off from Limestone in the dead of winter, we had people travel all the way up, and this is definitely in the midst of COVID, but travel all the way up from New Jersey, even in Massachusetts and other states, and in the dead of winter, in this way up this big runway. We had over 100 cars, people. I don't know how many people were in each car in the dead of winter in Limestone, Maine, which is, 4 hours from here, right? Now, this is not, Limestone, Maine is not known for its beautiful coastal property. Washington County is, and I think it's an incredible opportunity as we do launches over spring through fall every year. It's going to be an incredible opportunity for additional tourism and the industries that we're usually natively good at, but Washington County really has not been able to take advantage of. So we're really looking forward to it. When we went up there, we booked the hotels. Not we, Blue Shift, but everybody that came up. They had to go to the towns well outside of Limestone area, and those hotels were all booked up as a result. So I took more than my fair share of the time slot, so I'm going to pass it over to Emily. I'm just sharing here some pictures. This is actually literally the test cell that we're building up right now for our full-size engine, which you should hear roar to life. Well, hopefully you'll be watching it live. Our first test is planned right now for the week of Thanksgiving. We are just like our previous test site. It is totally solar powered, and we literally brought this solar powered rig over thanks to Sheepscott Solar this very weekend. So very excited. And this is just this is not to show my face, but necessarily show this is we hope to announce where this location is, but I can tell you where you see me standing here is where we plan to announce, hopefully nobody recognizes this, where we plan to announce to the world that we are going to be launching from here next year. So stay tuned. We have yet to sign the lease, but we have some really exciting news to share soon, very soon. And that's it. Questions?
Very exciting. Does anybody have a question for Sasha? If not, we can turn it over to Emily. She can talk about the statewide implications and the main. Turn it over to Emily.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'll try to do my best to not repeat some of the information Sasha shared, but just for a quick introduction, my name is Emily Bunnells. I am the director of the Maine Spaceport Initiative. I've been working on this for a couple years now, just trying to understand not only what the spaceport will be and what it could be, but what the impact will be to Maine. And so I'll be sharing some of that material today. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the spaceport really came to fruition, or the concept came to fruition back in 2017. A small group of stakeholders got together, convened by the Maine Space Grant Consortium, which is a NASA-funded nonprofit aimed at furthering educational opportunities and the commercial space industry within the state of Maine. Each state has a Space Grant Consortium. So they gathered a small group of stakeholders and looked for moonshot ideas. How could they contribute meaningfully to the sustainable economic development of Maine? They came up with this concept of the spaceport, recognizing, as Sasha alluded to earlier, that Maine has this really unique geographic advantage to launch directly over the ocean without overflight of populations or interference with established flight patterns. So once this idea was hatched towards the end of the year, they collected about 60 people to vet the idea, and there were no fatal flaws identified in this one-day workshop with guests such as NASA, the FAA, and other sort of commercial interests. At the end of 2018, that's when I was hired and started working on this project to understand the true feasibility. So that really meant going out to the market, understanding from market stakeholders such as MIT, Draper Labs, more in-depth conversations with the FAA, NASA, other commercial interests such as satellite manufacturing companies, obviously talking with Sasha and another launch vehicle developer in the state called Vault Enterprises. and really getting a good understanding from every different stakeholder where they sit, what the angle was on a Maine spaceport concept. So we got really good feedback. There were, again, no one identified anything that would have killed the project. So the Maine Space Grant Consortium Board voted it to the next stage where I developed a business plan. So really fleshed out what is a spaceport? What will it be? Obviously, as Sasha discussed, vertical launch is a big piece of it. It's kind of the linchpin that will bring more space-related industry to Maine, but there are also opportunities with regard to data analytics coming from the satellites, data-driven companies that we have the opportunity to harvest, as well as further R&D and development. So those are the business units, but underneath the actual business is an educational outreach program to really use space as a means for engagement to get our students in the K through 12 and university level engaged not only in space, but in technology, mathematics, engineering, all of the STEM related fields, which currently Maine is falling behind on. So after the business plan was developed, excuse me, we put a bill together to develop the Maine Space Leadership Council. It went to the Ideas Committee in the legislature last March, and it passed unanimously. Unfortunately, the next day, the legislature shut down and it never saw the light of day. We decided to progress anyway, and we received funds from the U.S. Department of Commerce and matching funds by MTI to develop the strategic plan, which is what we're currently in the midst of. And we recently, as of a couple of weeks ago, submitted a new bill to create the Maine Spaceport Corporation, which will oversee the development of the spaceport going forward. So without further ado, let's talk about why this is a great opportunity, or why it could be a great opportunity. So I think everybody who was around back in the 60s was focused on what was happening in space. It was hard to get around. And there's a new resurgence happening in the space industry. There's, for a number of reasons, the advancements in technology, the miniaturization of technology, and the declining cost of technology that goes into spacecraft is having this pressure, allowing space to become not just the domain of large government projects that are exceptionally expensive, long, and slow-paced, but now we have the opportunity to address space directly through private industry in the commercial market. So it's opened up this new era, which is called the new space industry. Roughly in 2019, which is the last time this market was really looked at in depth, because I don't think we've got 2020 yet, but the entire industry, both national and commercial, so nation state level funding as well as the global commercial industry, was 366 billion. So and that's grown pretty significantly since 2010. Launch is a big piece of that, so it's about 5 billion and growing. Ground equipment, which Maine is actually very well suited for due to the sparse density and low electromagnetic interference, allows signal to be captured very well. Both of those big parts of the industry, as well as satellite services and manufacturing, which I'll get to. So overall, governments worldwide are continuing to look at space, and they're continuing to invest in space. This is becoming a big and continuously bigger area of investment. The United States is leading by a long shot, but other projects, other states are continuing to invest as well. And as you can see down here, the civil component of it, so the NASA-related research and focus on getting further out into space, is continuing to increase, while defense is actually dropping a bit in relative terms. So as I said, it's becoming a hot area for investment. It's a lot of risk capital is being poured into this. As you can see, the trends really since 2010 have really picked up. It's become a viable area for risk capital to go and expect returns in a shorter timeline than ever before. So some of this investment has produced advancements in technology that we're continuing to monetize. What Maine specifically is focused on is the small satellite market. So we're not going to be doing these large SpaceX gigantic rockets. As Sasha said, it's going to be a smaller class of rocket. His in particular is using biofuel, so it's sustainable. But this is a class of satellites that is growing really significantly. Overall, we anticipate it to be a 25 billion market by 2030, and that is even considered a conservative number. So another thing to look at in terms of the market opportunity is how much of this is happening in the US. So about 60% of all this activity is happening in the US today. And most of these rockets are intended for polar orbit, which again is what Maine is well suited to develop. And here again is the sort of demand increasing. Projections for launch services over the next 5 to 6 years. So why is Maine great for this opportunity? Well, as Sasha mentioned, we've got 2 polar orbit opportunities from spaceports in the US right now that typically launch into polar orbit. One is Vandenberg out in California, and the other is Alaska. There's a noticeable lack of these services in the eastern part of the United States. So as you can see here, Maine, if from the Washington County coast, could launch directly south, getting in a polar orbit, which means it's going either around the poles or slightly askew of the poles, which is called sun-synchronous orbit. Many of the communication satellites that you've heard about recently, as well as Earth observation satellites, will require a polar orbit. Here, as we can see, is sort of the relative size of the various rockets. Again, this is what's happening in Florida down towards the right end of the scale. Here's what we're looking at in Maine. And again, there are different levels of space. So low Earth orbit is the orbit which we would be focused on. Medium is slightly further out. And then you've got geostationary. So those are the large bus-side satellites that are sent into space. Low Earth orbit are typically smaller satellites. So in terms of the overview, how would this look in Maine? So as Sasha said, we'll be focusing vertical launch in the Washington County area. We also have opportunity to develop horizontal launch capabilities in limestone. We will partner directly with the University of Maine to develop research and transfer technology focused on space, hopefully in collaboration with the material science efforts going on there, into spin out businesses from there and pursue research initiatives aligned to NASA. Brunswick Landing would be another area of R&D focused development, so where we would potentially house some of these startups related to space. And then the Rue Institute is an organization, an educational organization we've started to partner with to look at the opportunities of harnessing the data from space and how that can be applied, not only for business purposes, but to specifically within Maine, to how they could help, how satellite data could help Maine-based industries make better management decisions. So this is just a rough timeline of rocket launch. So the planning for a rocket launch begins 1 or 2 years prior to, sorry if you can hear some dog sounds in the background. So 1 to 2 years prior to launch, planning begins. Roughly a year before launch is when the contract sign and the launch customer really starts focusing on the ground logistics. About 2 to 3 months before the launch, the customer arrives at the complex with their personnel, a small team of personnel, and much closer to launch within the last several weeks. This number could increase to upwards of 100 to 200 engineers and technicians. It's going to vary launch to launch, but depending on the team, you've got the rocket team that will focus on the launch vehicle, and then you've also got the payload teams that are integrating their payloads on site or nearby to put into the rocket to get to space. We anticipate that there could be 2 to 5 million generated in revenue for the state's economy for each individual launch. And again, much of this will be located in Washington County, where the launch site is anticipated to be housed. So I think one of the things, or one of the concerns is, whoa, we're not set up for that yet. Well, launch is, the development timeline that we're looking at here is some test launch in the 0 to 2 year time frame, and then in the 2 to 5 year time frame, we're looking towards ramping up as the facility is funded and built. And generally, like if you look at a place like Florida right now, which is the most active spaceport, they're only doing a couple dozen launches a year. So it's not like this is going to be a daily activity. I know that it can, if you're thinking about the frequency, I think it makes more sense to look at it as a launch a month or probably less in the first couple of years. So this is not going to be an immediate overwhelm, but something that we can work together with the county to ramp up to. As I said, another initiative that we're focusing on is using space and space STEM specifically to reach out to schools in Maine. In fact, we just received positive news that we're not fully ready to share about funding for an earmark that would focus on bringing some of this STEM-related space activity to schools in Washington County. So more to come on that later, but education is a huge part of the initiative. As Sasha said, tourism offers a wonderful opportunity to bring people to Washington County. Right now in Florida, they attract almost 1 million people a year down to their complex. Granted, that's year round, but as Sasha said, we had tons of people coming to Maine for the launch out of Loring in the dead of winter. It couldn't have been less hospitable, and yet they still came. So one of the things that we did in our business and implementation plan is we looked at, with the University of Maine, what would be the economic impact? I mean, we ran a couple different scenarios. So given the size of the market, the roughly 1,300 launches per year, 60% of which are happening in the US, and then the subset of that, which are aiming for polar orbit and smaller satellites. If we were able to capture just 10% of that market, we believe that over the next 15 to 20 years, that we could generate upwards of 3,500 jobs. So 10% is sort of a, given the fact right now there are only 2 other locations, and Alaska's much further away, and Vandenberg is typically focused on government payloads. We feel that 30 to 50% may be a more accurate accounting of what the market share we could actually attract would be over time. In that case, the actual employment would reach closer to 6,000 jobs, which is a pretty incredible economic impact for the Maine Spaceport complex. So this is not just looking at launch, it's also looking at building the ecosystem around launch and some of the educational opportunities as well. So here's the 30% on the right and the 10% scenario on the left. With regard to revenues that could be generated from the spaceport itself, again, the 10% scenario brings it close to $200 million per year by 2040, and the 30% makes it closer to 500. So that's a pretty overwhelming and significant economic impact in terms of revenue. So once we developed these, we sort of looked around and said, who else with a spaceport is having similar kinds of economic impact? And down at the Mid-Atlantic Spaceport in Virginia, they estimated the total economic impact of their spaceport to be $1.3 billion annually. So that's both direct action, activity with the spaceport. It's the secondary effects of having, the hospitality industry involved, housing, feeding, hosting families that came up for the launch but stay for vacation, come for the launch, stay for the lobster, as well as the rise in pay that has secondary or tertiary effects on the economy. In terms of GDP, we also see pretty positive effects there. So increasing the GDP by nearly $1 billion in the 10% market share scenario. Here's one thing that I wanted to focus on, just thinking about the larger sort of economic growth strategy for Maine. So aerospace workers in general come from a variety of different backgrounds. A lot of them are credentialed, some of them are PhDs in rocket science, yes. But there's also a lot of technicians required that will come from local tech schools, vocational schools, the welders, the plumbers, the other sort of technicians that are going to be very important to the development of the spaceport. So on average, the workforce in aerospace and defense is paid 76% higher wages than the average household income in Maine. So that's a pretty significant impact. And these are numbers from the Aerospace Industry Association of the U.S. And that applies to the national average as well.
Emily, can I interrupt?
Sure.
Can we wrap it up a little bit? Because we want to save at least a few minutes for questions.
Sure. This last slide here is just another direct example of another spaceport developed out in New Mexico that has estimated what the direct, indirect, and induced impact of the spaceport is to the area. So as you can see, it's about 100 million in 2020, and they're ramping up to almost 200 million in 2029. So the economic impact is real, for whether it be direct, indirect, or induced. And one final slide is that we are not the only state looking at this. There are other states trying to get into this, and so time is of the essence. We really need to be first to market to establish ourselves and reinforce the idea that we can launch from Maine, but it's also a wonderful place to visit. So that's it. Follow us on social media at SpaceportMaine.
Thank you, Emily. I'm so excited about this because I'm from New Mexico and I used to live in Florida, and my first job, I want, when I was 5, I wanted to be an astronaut, but didn't work out for me. But anyways, so we had one question from the chat, which is wondering how the biofuel, which I guess is more for Sasha, is carbon neutral. What is it made of? I know you can't give away the secret sauce, but what about the potential for pollution, sound pollution, light pollution, and debris and contamination?
Sure. Yeah. And great question. See if I can remember them all and answer them quickly. So it is near carbon neutral. What makes it less than carbon neutral is transportation, whether it's on the farm or transportation to our location. The one picture you saw there of the solar panel trailer, that is literally powering one of our containers, which is actually used to process the fuel and get it ready for putting into the engine. So we internally will be using as much as possible renewable energy, probably almost all solar in what we do. Looking forward to the day that we can actually get electric powered trucks ourselves. But now in terms of contamination, in many ways, burning our fuel is like burning a lot of hydrocarbons. It is certainly less sootier than, for instance, burning wood in a wood stove or a pellet stove. But the carbon neutrality comes around just like burning biofuels like wood. The concept is that the carbon you release, and we basically create water and carbon when we burn. So very similar to a wood stove, the general thought process is that the creation of the fuel itself, the agricultural, essentially the plants, it's plant derived, those processes absorb as much or more carbon than is released when we actually burn our engines. So I hope that explains it. In terms of debris, first and foremost, we plan to recover all of our rocket. It's actually a very important part of our model, our business model. And then two, I'll add that if any debris falls into the ocean, any of our fuel, it is completely non-toxic, and will not, harm the fisheries or the ecosystem below, which we're very proud of. And I think very few rocket companies can say that today. I, of course, hope that more do in the future and change that dialogue. In fact, when we did launch in January, we started seeing articles in space websites and sort of big name websites in our industry and into the world talking about this. And it was really never talked about before, about how to make launch cleaner and more responsible, more sustainable. There's certainly, and I think the dialogue has changed. You've seen some pressure on the really big companies like the Blue Origins of the world and Virgin and others. And they have talking points about how they will someday, but they are not yet today. So we're leading the way.
That's awesome.
I would say it's just,
go ahead, Emily.
I was just going to say that just one other aspect is that, all of this has to be approved, and the safety plans are looked at in great painful detail by the FAA. So, none of this is happening sort of rogue or anything like that. It's a very public process. Getting approved is a very public process. There's environmental studies that happen. There's a long list of security requirements to ensure that this is as safe as it can possibly be.
As Emily mentioned, there's a big environmental analysis part that's a big portion of what we have to get over. Not necessarily that we're concerned about what we're doing, but that it's a big logistical thing that has to be done, and that's a very public process, which is good. I think that any rocket company should be put to light.
Do we have any other questions? If someone just wants to unmute and ask a question, that's okay too. Oh, hang on, we have somebody. Okay, I guess there was an article in Alaska about 2 rocket malfunctionings contaminating in Alaska, so they were worried about that.
Yeah, I think that's, I think those are great examples. That's what, that's the company called Astra. They use this, what most rocket companies use, which is a refined version of kerosene. This is petroleum. So I think that's exactly what one of the areas that we're trying to address is we're trying to show that it can be done with more eco-friendly, bio-derived fuels that is better for our planet. And I hope that we as Mainers demand that any rocket company that launches from Maine is doing it in a sustainable and earth-friendly way.
That's awesome. Anybody have any other comments or questions on it? We have about 5 minutes left, so Susan, I see you unmuting. Go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Mingo. I'm the president at Washington County Community College located in Calais, Maine. And I don't know that we've actually had any conversations yet, and I'm very intrigued by your presentation and just would like to learn more about the technicians that you're needing and how the community college can play a role in training the very large workforce that you're anticipating if this all comes to fruition. So wanted to put that out there and excited to hear more and talk with you further.
Great.
That's awesome.
Thank you for making the introduction. I just wanted to say that from the Spaceport Initiative, we have a leadership council, and Janet Sorter, who's the head of the community college system, is on the board. So we have been working sort of ongoing, but we're in the midst of taking this plan from like this 30,000 foot perspective down to the 10 to 5,000 foot perspective, at which case we'll get more tactical and have those development conversations to prepare for this workforce of the future, because it's not just like we said, I think a lot of people associate, rocket scientists with aerospace, and there's so many things in between that are critical path items that need to be addressed. And we absolutely want to involve and engage the community college, particularly in areas where there could be a focus in Washington County on space-related activity. So absolutely would love to continue the conversation and have every intention of doing so.
Wonderful. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Great.
Susan, I'll just add that we as Blue Shift would, the jobs that I see us needing over the next year to 3 years and then beyond is certainly ability to have people who are trained as aviation tech, so understanding how to do the wiring and plumbing for planes is extremely relevant. There's almost 100% overlap with what that'll look like inside the rockets. Techs who can do that, folks who can do CNC machining and milling, advanced machining is really important to us. People capable of doing composites work, carbon fiber, Kevlar, et cetera. That's going to be very important to us. For us, there's going to be a lot of logistical jobs, which, you know, for preparing for launch and getting out to launch, but also programming and data analysis is going to be a big part of some of our staff members. So I hope that gives a couple of ideas too.
It does, very helpful.
Future.
Thank you.
Sure.
I would add to that cybersecurity and software programming.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. All those things. I wish I was younger. In preparation for this presentation today, I watched Hidden Figures as well as the sci-fi series about colonization in the asteroid belt or something like that. So I was ready for today.
Expanse?
Yes, that's the one, The Expanse.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
So total space geek here, totally.
Nice.
But, any other questions? We have a couple minutes. We will be automatically leaving the room to go back to the main room. So always happy to, if anybody has other questions, to send them over to SEC and we can forward them on to Sasha and Emily, other questions about the project.